The knock came at 7 in the evening, right when Maya was about to heat up leftover soup for dinner. She wasn't expecting anyone. She rarely did. Her apartment was the kind of quiet that most people found uncomfortable. But Maya had grown to prefer it that way. When she opened the door, she found Mr. Barton standing there in his brown cardigan, the one his wife had knitted for him years ago. His eyes were red. His hands were shaking slightly. Maya knew immediately that something was wrong. "Eleanor passed this morning," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In her sleep. The doctors said it was peaceful." Maya felt the words hit her chest before her brain could fully process them. Eleanor Barton. The woman who used to bring her homemade cookies every Christmas. The woman who watered Maya's plants whenever she traveled for work. The woman who had lived next door for as long as Maya could remember. "Mr. Barton, I'm so sorry," Maya said, and she meant it with every part of her heart. "Is there anything I can do? Anything at all?" The old man looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his eyes, something he was working up the courage to ask. Maya waited. She had learned a long time ago that grief moves at its own pace, and you can't rush someone through it. "There is one thing," he finally said. "It might sound strange. You can say no if you want. I won't be offended." "What is it?" "The memorial service is next Saturday." Eleanor always loved music. She used to say that heaven probably sounds like a piano playing somewhere far away. He paused, swallowing hard. "She used to listen to you practice. Back when you were younger. Before you stopped. She'd sit by our window with her tea and just listen. She said you played like you were telling secrets nobody else knew how to say out loud." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew where this was going, and every part of her wanted to stop it before he could finish. "I was wondering," Mr. Barton continued, "if you might play something at her service. Just one piece. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just think she would have wanted you there. She would have wanted to hear you one more time." The request hung in the air between them. Maya opened her mouth to say no. The word was right there, sitting on her tongue, ready to come out. "No. I can't. No. I don't play anymore. No. You don't understand what you're asking me to do." But then she looked at Mr. Barton's face, really looked at it. She saw the grief carved into every line, the exhaustion pooling under his eyes, the way his shoulders curved forward, like he was carrying something impossibly heavy. This man had just lost his wife of 43 years. This man had woken up this morning to find the love of his life gone forever. And he was standing at her door, asking for one small thing to help him say goodbye. "Of course," Maya heard herself say. Mr. Barton's eyes filled with tears. He reached out and squeezed her hand, and then he shuffled back to his apartment without another word. Maya closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. What had she just done? She walked into her living room and stared at the piano sitting against the far wall. It was an old, upright, dark wood with ivory keys that had yellowed slightly over the years. It had belonged to her mother. It was the only thing Maya had kept after the accident. The accident. Even now, 12 years later, those two words could make her chest tighten and her breath come short. She didn't like to think about it. She had built her entire adult life around not thinking about it. But now, standing in her quiet apartment with the weight of a promise she should never have made, the memories came flooding back whether she wanted them or not. Maya had been 19 years old and home from her first year at a prestigious music school. She had worked her entire childhood for that acceptance letter. Piano lessons since she was 4, competitions since she was 8, scholarships and auditions and endless hours of practice until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred. She was going to be a concert pianist. Everyone said so. Her teachers, her classmates, the judges who gave her first-place trophies and told her she had something special. Her mother had driven her to every single lesson, every single competition, every single audition. Her mother had sat in practice rooms and recital halls and car rides, listening to Maya work through the same passages over and over until they were perfect. Her mother had believed in her dreams more than Maya believed in them herself. That night, they were driving home from a celebration dinner. Maya had just learned she'd been selected for a summer program in Vienna. Her mother was so proud. Maya remembered the way her face looked in the glow of the dashboard lights, smiling that warm smile that always made Maya feel like everything would be okay. Then the truck ran the red light. Maya woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. The doctors told her that her mother had died on impact. They told her that she was lucky to be alive. They told her about the surgery on her left hand, the nerve damage, the months of physical therapy ahead of her. They told her, gently but honestly, that she would probably never play at a professional level again. Maya didn't cry when she heard the news. She didn't cry at her mother's funeral. She didn't cry during the months of rehabilitation, the exercises that made her scream in pain, the slow and devastating realization that everything she had worked for was gone. She just stopped playing. She dropped out of music school. She moved to a different city. She got a job at an insurance company. The kind of job that required nothing from her heart, only her time. She built a life that was small and quiet and safe. A life where no one expected anything from her, and she never had to explain why she flinched whenever she heard piano music in a store or a restaurant. The piano had come with her to every apartment, every new beginning. She couldn't bring herself to sell it, but she never opened it. It just sat there, year after year, collecting dust and holding all the things she couldn't face. And now she had promised a grieving old man that she would sit down at a piano in front of other people and play. Maya walked over to the bench and ran her fingers along the closed lid. She could feel her left hand tingling, the way it always did when she thought about playing. The nerve damage had healed as much as it was going to heal. She had about 70% function, maybe less. Enough to tie her shoes, type on a keyboard, do all the normal things that normal people did, but not enough to play the way she used to. Not even close. She thought about calling Mr. Barton and telling him the truth. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I haven't played in 12 years. My hand doesn't work right anymore. You'll have to find someone else." But she could still see his face. She could still hear Eleanor's voice, the way she used to hum along from the other side of the wall. Maya sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on the closed lid and felt the cool wood beneath her palms. Her heart was racing. Her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. She had 1 week to figure out how to do the impossible. 1 week to break 12 years of silence. 1 week to sit down at a piano and play like she was telling secrets nobody else knew how to say out loud. She had no idea how she was going to do it. But she had made a promise to a grieving man and a woman who would never hear music again. And Maya had always been the kind of person who kept her promises, no matter what they cost her. She just hadn't realized, not yet, that this particular promise was going to cost her everything she had spent 12 years hiding from, and it was going to give her back something she thought was lost forever. For 3 days, Maya couldn't bring herself to open the piano. She would walk past it in the morning on her way to make coffee. She would glance at it in the evening, while eating dinner on the couch. She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the keys hidden beneath that wooden lid. But she couldn't do it. Every time she got close, every time she reached out to lift the cover, something inside her locked up tight. It was like there was a wall between her and that instrument, a wall built from 12 years of grief and fear, and all the things she had buried so deep, she forgot they were there. On the second day, she tried a different approach. She sat down on the bench and just stayed there. She didn't open the piano. She didn't touch the keys. She just sat, breathing slowly, trying to remember what it felt like to be the girl who used to play for hours without stopping. That girl felt like a stranger now. Someone Maya used to know a long time ago, in a different life, before everything changed. On the third day, she almost called Mr. Barton to cancel. She had her phone in her hand. His number pulled up on the screen. All she had to do was press the button and explain that she couldn't do it, that she was sorry, that he would have to find someone else. But then she thought about Eleanor. She thought about all those afternoons when she was a teenager, practicing scales and arpeggios and difficult passages from Chopin and Debussy. She remembered how Eleanor would sometimes knock on the wall. 3 soft taps. Her way of saying she was listening, and she liked what she heard. Maya put the phone down. On the 4th day, she finally opened the piano. The lid creaked as she lifted it, the sound loud in the silence of her apartment. The keys were dusty. Some of them had yellowed more than others, but they were all still there, waiting, patient, like they had known she would come back eventually. Maya placed her right hand on the keys first. She pressed down on middle C, and the note rang out clear and true. The piano was somehow still in tune, or close enough that it didn't matter. She played a few more notes with her right hand, a simple melody she remembered from childhood, something her mother had taught her before she could even read music. Then she tried her left hand. The moment her fingers touched the keys, she felt it. The stiffness, the weakness, the way her pinky and ring finger didn't want to move independently anymore. The way her wrist ached when she tried to stretch an octave. The nerve damage had taken so much from her. She had known it would be bad, but knowing something and feeling it are 2 very different things. She tried to play a simple scale. C major, the easiest one there is. Her right hand flew through it without thinking. Her left hand stumbled on the 3rd note and gave up completely by the 5th. Maya pulled her hands back like she had touched something hot. Her eyes were burning. Her chest was tight. This was a mistake. This was all a huge mistake. She should have said no when she had the chance. She should have protected herself the way she had been protecting herself for 12 years. She stood up from the bench and walked to the window. Outside, the city was going about its business. Cars and people and noise. Everyone living their lives like normal. Nobody knew that Maya Chen was falling apart in her tiny apartment, undone by a piano she hadn't touched in over a decade. She stayed at that window for a long time. She watched the sun move across the sky. She watched the shadows lengthen on the floor. She thought about her mother, about Eleanor, about all the music that used to live inside her before she locked it away. And somewhere in those quiet hours, something shifted. She didn't know how to describe it exactly. It wasn't a decision, not really. It was more like a door opening somewhere deep inside her. A door she didn't even know was there. She realized that she had been so focused on what she couldn't do anymore that she had never stopped to ask what she still could do. Maybe she couldn't play like she used to. Maybe she would never perform in concert halls or win competitions or make her mother proud the way she had always dreamed. But maybe that wasn't the only way to play. Maybe there was another way. A different way. Something she had never considered because she had been too busy mourning the musician she used to be. Maya walked back to the piano. She sat down on the bench. She placed both hands on the keys. And this time, she didn't try to play anything she had learned before. She didn't try to be the girl she used to be. She just played. It started with a single note. Then another. Then a simple chord that surprised her, with how much it sounded like loneliness. She let her right hand carry the melody while her left hand did what it could. Simple bass notes, easy rhythms, nothing fancy or complicated. She worked around her limitations instead of fighting against them. The music that came out was strange. It was halting and imperfect, full of pauses and hesitations. It didn't sound like anything she had ever played before, but it sounded like something real, something true. Something that came from a place inside her that had been silent for so long she had forgotten it existed. She played for an hour that night, then 2. She lost track of time completely. Lost in the sound. Lost in the feeling of keys beneath her fingers and music filling the air. When she finally stopped, her hands were aching and her face was wet with tears. She didn't remember crying. But for the first time in 12 years, she didn't feel empty. The next day, she started writing things down. She had an old notebook from her music school days. The pages yellowed, but still blank in the back. She wrote down the notes she had played, the chords she had discovered, the fragments of melody that felt right even when they didn't follow any rules she had learned. She wasn't trying to write a masterpiece. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She was just trying to create something that was honest, something that told the truth about who she was now, not who she used to be. The piece took shape slowly over the next few days. It was simple, much simpler than anything she would have written before the accident. The left-hand part was almost embarrassingly basic. Just sustained notes and gentle movements that her damaged fingers could manage. But somehow, that simplicity made it more powerful. Not less. The melody breathed. It had space. It sounded like someone speaking quietly in a room full of noise. She thought about Eleanor while she wrote it. She thought about the garden on their shared balcony, the roses that Eleanor had tended with such care, the way she used to talk to her plants like they were old friends. She thought about Mr. Barton and 43 years of marriage, 43 years of loving someone and then having to learn how to live without them. She thought about her mother. She thought about the accident. She thought about all the silence that had followed, all the years of pretending she was fine when she wasn't, all the nights she had spent alone in apartments just like this one, trying to outrun a grief that never went away. The music held all of it, the love and the loss, the pain and the hope, the broken pieces and the way they somehow fit together into something new. She called it Eleanor's Garden. It wasn't perfect. Her left hand still stumbled in places, still couldn't do what she wanted it to do, but she practiced it anyway, over and over, until she could play it through from beginning to end without stopping. The mistakes became part of the piece. The imperfections became part of the story. By Friday night, the night before the memorial service, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt ready, not confident, not certain, not free from fear, but ready. Ready to sit down at a piano, in front of other people, and play something that came from her heart. Ready to honor Eleanor's memory with the only gift she had to give. Ready to break 12 years of silence and see what was waiting on the other side. She didn't know yet that what was waiting would change her life forever. She didn't know that a stranger in the back of the room would hear her play and ask a question that would open doors she never knew existed. She didn't know that this simple piece, written for a grieving husband and a woman who loved roses, would travel further than any music she had ever imagined playing. All she knew was that tomorrow, she would sit down at a piano and tell the truth. And for the first time in 12 years, that felt like enough. The morning of the memorial service, Maya woke up before her alarm. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her stomach tight with nerves, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. What if she forgot the notes? What if her hand locked up completely? What if she sat down at that piano and nothing came out at all? She got dressed slowly, choosing a simple black dress that her mother had bought her years ago for a recital. It still fit, somehow. She hadn't worn it since before the accident, but it felt right to wear it now, like bringing a piece of her mother with her to say goodbye to Eleanor. The chapel was small, tucked away on a quiet street lined with oak trees. Maya arrived early, hoping to have a few minutes alone with the piano before people started showing up. The room was simple and warm, with wooden pews and soft light coming through stained glass windows. At the front, next to a table covered with photographs of Eleanor, sat an old, upright piano. Maya walked toward it like she was approaching something dangerous. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her fingertips. She sat down on the bench and lifted the lid, revealing keys that were worn smooth from years of use. Someone had placed a small vase of roses on top of the piano. Pink roses. Eleanor's favorite. She placed her hands on the keys and played the first few bars of Eleanor's Garden. The piano had a different tone than hers at home, warmer and softer, but the notes still rang true. Her left hand cooperated, at least for now. She took a deep breath and told herself that she could do this. She had practiced. She was ready. Everything would be fine. Then, people started arriving. They came in ones and twos at first, then in small groups. friends from Eleanor's gardening club, neighbors from the building, a few distant relatives who had driven in from out of town. Maya watched them file into the pews, their faces solemn, their voices hushed. She counted maybe 30 people by the time the service was scheduled to begin. Mr. Barton sat in the front row, his brown cardigan buttoned up to his throat. He looked smaller than Maya remembered. Like grief had physically shrunk him. When he turned around and saw her sitting at the piano, he gave her a small nod. Just a tiny movement of his head, but it carried so much weight. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. Thank you." Maya nodded back and tried to smile, but her face felt frozen. The service began with a few words from the minister. A gentle man with white hair who spoke about Eleanor's kindness, her love of growing things, her dedication to her husband and her community. Then, a woman from the gardening club stood up and shared a story about how Eleanor had once saved an entire rose bush that everyone else had given up on, nursing it back to health over the course of a year until it bloomed more beautifully than any of the others. More people spoke. More stories were shared. Maya listened to all of them, learning things about Eleanor she had never known. The woman had lived such a full life, touching so many people in ways big and small. And now she was gone, leaving behind only memories and the people who loved her. Then it was Maya's turn. She had planned to play a traditional hymn. Something safe, something simple, something that wouldn't draw too much attention to her damaged hand or her rusty technique. She had practiced Amazing Grace for hours, working out an arrangement that she could manage without too many mistakes. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. But as she placed her hands on the keys, she thought about Eleanor sitting by her window with a cup of tea, listening through the walls. She thought about the 3 soft taps that meant, "I'm here and I'm listening." She thought about Mr. Barton asking her to play like she was telling secrets nobody else knew how to say out loud. And she made a different choice. She played Eleanor's Garden. The first notes fell into the silence of the chapel like stones dropping into still water. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat, but she kept going. The melody was simple, almost childlike in its clarity. But there was something underneath it. Something deeper. Something that spoke of love and loss, and the strange beauty of things that don't last forever. Her left hand stumbled on the 4th measure. She felt her pinky drag behind, missing the note she had practiced 100 times. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She just kept playing, letting the imperfection become part of the music, letting her broken hand tell its own part of the story. The middle section was the hardest. The melody climbed higher, asking more from her left hand than it wanted to give. She had to simplify on the fly, changing notes she had written to notes she could actually play. It wasn't what she had practiced. It wasn't what she had planned. But somehow, it was still music. Somehow, it was still true. By the time she reached the final passage, her eyes were blurring with tears. She could barely see the keys anymore. But her fingers knew where to go. They had learned this piece not just with her mind, but with her heart, and they carried her through to the end. The last note faded into silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The chapel was so quiet that Maya could hear her own heartbeat, loud and fast and terrified. She had done it. She had played in front of people for the first time in 12 years, and now she had no idea what would happen next. Then she heard it. A soft sound, coming from somewhere in the pews. At first she thought it was coughing, but then she realized it was crying. Someone was weeping, and then someone else. And then the room was full of the quiet sounds of people moved by something they hadn't expected. Mr. Barton turned around in his seat. His face was wet with tears, but he was smiling. A real smile, the first one Maya had seen from him since Eleanor died. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. "Thank you." That was exactly what she would have wanted. Maya closed the lid of the piano with shaking hands. She stood up on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to get out of this room before she fell apart completely. She was halfway to the door when someone touched her arm. Maya turned and found herself facing a woman she didn't recognize. She was maybe 50 years old, with kind eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair. She was holding a tissue in one hand and a small camera in the other. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I have to ask, where did that music come from?" Maya didn't know how to answer. The music had come from so many places. From 12 years of silence. From a grieving neighbor and his wife, who loved roses. From a car accident on a dark road and a mother who never got to see her daughter grow up. From all the broken pieces of a life that Maya had tried so hard to leave behind. "I wrote it," she finally said. "This week. For Eleanor." End quote. The woman's eyes widened. "You wrote that? In a week?" Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "My name is Diane," the woman said. "I knew Eleanor through the gardening club. I'm also a documentary filmmaker. I've been working on a project about grief and healing, about how people find their way back to life after losing someone they love." She paused, looking at Maya with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I've interviewed dozens of people for this project. I've heard hundreds of stories, but I've never heard anything like what you just played." Maya didn't know what to say. She felt exposed, like someone had peeled back her skin and looked directly at everything she had been hiding. "I have to ask you something," Diane continued. "And please, feel free to say no, but I would love to hear your story. The real story. Because that music didn't come from nowhere. That music came from somewhere deep, somewhere painful, somewhere most people are afraid to go." She pressed a business card into Maya's hand. "Think about it," she said. "Call me if you want to talk. No pressure. But I think you have something important to say. And I think the world might need to hear it." Then she walked away, leaving Maya standing alone in the aisle of a quiet chapel, holding a business card and wondering how a simple promise to a grieving neighbor had just cracked open a door she thought she had sealed shut forever. Maya kept Diane's business card on her kitchen counter for 2 weeks. Every morning, she would look at it while drinking her coffee. Every evening she would pick it up, turn it over in her hands, and put it back down again. She wasn't ready to call. She wasn't sure she ever would be. But she couldn't throw it away either. Something had changed inside her since the memorial service. The silence that had felt so comfortable for 12 years now felt heavy, like a coat she had been wearing for too long. She found herself sitting at the piano every evening after work, playing Eleanor's Garden over and over. And then playing other things, new things, melodies that came from somewhere she couldn't name. Mr. Barton knocked on her door one Sunday afternoon with a plate of cookies. His wife's recipe, he explained. Eleanor had written it down years ago, and he was trying to learn how to make them himself. They weren't as good as hers, he admitted, but he thought Maya might like to try them anyway. They sat together in her living room, eating cookies that were slightly burnt on the bottom, and talking about Eleanor. Mr. Barton told stories Maya had never heard before. How they had met at a dance when they were both 17. How Eleanor had said no the first 3 times he asked her out. How she had finally said yes on the 4th try, but only if he promised to bring her flowers every week for a year. "Did you?" Maya asked. "Every single week, Mr. Barton said, smiling at the memory. "And then I just kept going. 52 flowers a year for 43 years. She had to buy extra vases just to hold them all." Maya thought about that kind of love. The steady, patient, showing up kind of love that didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Just flowers every week for 43 years. Just being there, day after day, until the very end. "She would have loved what you played," Mr. Barton said quietly. "At the service. That piece you wrote. She would have loved it so much." Maya felt her throat tighten. "I hope so. I know so." He paused, looking at her with those tired, kind eyes. "She used to tell me about listening to you practice. She said, You had a gift. She said it was a shame that gift had gone quiet. He reached over and patted her hand. I'm glad it found its voice again. Even if it took losing her to make it happen. After Mr. Barton left, Maya sat alone in her apartment for a long time. She thought about gifts and voices and all the years of silence. She thought about her mother, who had believed in her more than anyone. She thought about the accident, the hospital, the moment when a doctor had told her that her dreams were over. She picked up the business card and called Diane. They met for coffee the next day at a small cafe near Maya's apartment. Diane was warm and easy to talk to, the kind of person who asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. She didn't push. She didn't pry. She just sat across the table and let Maya tell her story at her own pace. And somehow, once Maya started talking, she couldn't stop. She told Diane about her childhood, about falling in love with piano the first time her fingers touched the keys. She told her about the competitions and the scholarships and the acceptance letter to music school that had felt like a dream coming true. She told her about her mother, about all those hours spent driving to lessons and sitting in practice rooms and believing, always believing, that Maya was going to do something special with her life. Then she told her about the accident. The words came out slowly at first, each one heavy and hard to say. The truck running the red light. The impact. Waking up in a hospital bed 3 days later. Learning that her mother was gone. Learning that her hand would never work the same way again. She told Diane about dropping out of school. About moving to a new city where nobody knew her name. About building a life that was small and safe and empty. A life where she never had to explain why she didn't play anymore. Why she couldn't play anymore. Why the thought of touching a piano made her feel like she was drowning. I was so angry, Maya said, surprising herself with the admission. For years, I was so angry. At the driver who ran the light. At the doctors who couldn't fix my hand. At my mother for dying and leaving me alone. At myself for surviving when she didn't. She paused, staring down at her coffee cup. I think the silence was easier than the anger. If I didn't play, I didn't have to think about everything I had lost. I could just pretend that part of my life had never existed. Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What changed?" Maya thought about Mr. Barton standing at her door with grief in his eyes. She thought about Eleanor, and the roses, and the 3 soft taps on the wall. She thought about sitting down at the piano for the first time in 12 years, and discovering that her hands still remembered how to make music, even if it wasn't the same music as before. Someone asked me for help, she said. Someone who was hurting. And I couldn't say no. Even though I was scared. Even though I didn't know if I could do it. I couldn't say no. Over the following weeks, Maya and Diane met many more times. Sometimes, they talked for hours. Sometimes Diane brought her camera and filmed Maya playing at her apartment. The afternoon light falling across the old piano, while Maya's fingers moved over the keys. Sometimes they just sat in silence. 2 women, who had both learned that loss, can hollow you out, but doesn't have to leave you empty forever. The hardest part was watching the footage back. Seeing herself on screen, playing with her damaged hand. Making mistakes that anyone could hear. Maya wanted to look away. She wanted to delete all of it and pretend it never happened. But Diane showed her something she hadn't noticed. The way her face changed when she played. The way the tension in her shoulders slowly released. The way her eyes would close and her whole body would soften, like the music was carrying her somewhere safe. That's what people need to see, Diane said. Not perfection. Not a performance. Just someone being brave enough to be broken in front of other people. That's the thing that will reach them. That's the thing that will make them feel less alone. Maya agreed to let Diane include her story in the documentary. She didn't know if anyone would care. She didn't know if it would make any difference at all. But she was tired of hiding. She was tired of pretending that the accident had erased who she was, instead of just changing her. She was tired of letting fear make all her decisions. The documentary was called The Space Between Notes. Diane worked on it for months, weaving together stories of people who had found their way back to life after devastating loss. Maya was one of 5 subjects, but somehow her story became the thread that held all the others together. Her music played under interviews with other survivors. Her face appeared at the beginning and the end, sitting at her piano, playing Eleanor's Garden while the credits rolled. The premiere was at a small film festival in the fall. Maya almost didn't go. The thought of sitting in a room full of strangers, watching herself be vulnerable on a giant screen, made her want to run away and never look back. But Mr. Barton insisted. He bought a new suit for the occasion, the first one he had owned since his wedding. He told Maya that Eleanor would have wanted them both to be there, and Maya knew he was right. So she went. She had no idea that the next 2 hours would change her life forever. She had no idea that a stranger in the audience would approach her afterward with tears in his eyes and a business card in his hand. She had no idea that the story she had been so afraid to tell was about to reach people she had never imagined, in places she had never been, with a message she didn't even know she was sending. All she knew, as the lights went down and the film began, was that she had finally stopped running from her own story. And that was enough to change everything. The theater was small, maybe 200 seats, but to Maya, it felt like a stadium. She sat between Mr. Barton and Diane in the 3rd row, her hands folded tight in her lap, her heart beating so fast she was sure everyone around her could hear it. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life, and then her face appeared, larger than life, sitting at her piano with afternoon lights streaming through the window. She almost couldn't watch, but she forced herself to keep her eyes open, to see what Diane had created from all those hours of conversation and footage. The documentary wove together 5 different stories of loss and healing. 5 different people who had found their way back from the darkest moments of their lives. There was a man who had lost his wife to cancer and learned to cook all her favorite recipes. A woman who had survived a house fire and now taught art to children with burns. A teenager who had lost his brother and started a foundation in his memory. And there was Maya, playing piano with her damaged hand, talking about her mother, crying on camera about things she had never said out loud to anyone. It was the most vulnerable she had ever been in her entire life. When the film ended, the theater was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole room was on their feet, applauding and wiping their eyes, and Maya didn't know where to look or what to do with her hands. People came up to her afterward, strangers with tears on their cheeks, telling her that her story had touched them, that her music had reached something inside them they couldn't name. A woman in her 60s squeezed Maya's hand and told her that she had stopped painting after her husband died. But now, she was going to try again. A young man with a scar on his arm said that Maya's words about anger had made him feel less alone for the first time in years. Maya didn't know what to say to any of them. She just nodded and said thank you and tried not to fall apart completely. Then a man approached her. He was maybe 40 years old, wearing a simple jacket and carrying a notebook. His eyes were red, like he had been crying, but he was smiling. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I know you must be overwhelmed, but I work for a record label, and I think we need to talk." Maya almost laughed. A record label. Her, the woman who hadn't played professionally in 12 years, whose left hand could barely manage a simple scale. "I'm not sure you understand," she said. "I'm not a performer anymore. My hand doesn't work the way it used to. I can't play the way real pianists play." The man shook his head. "That's exactly why I want to talk to you. There are millions of people out there who have been told they can't play anymore. People with injuries, disabilities, chronic conditions, people who gave up on music because they thought they had to be perfect to be worth listening to." He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Your music proves them wrong. Your music shows that broken doesn't mean finished. That's worth more than technical perfection could ever be." He handed her a business card. The second one she had received in less than a year. She looked down at it and felt the world shifting beneath her feet. Over the next few months, things moved faster than Maya could have imagined. The documentary won an award at the festival and got picked up for wider distribution. It aired on a streaming platform, and suddenly people all over the world were watching it, hearing her story, listening to Eleanor's Garden as the credits rolled. Letters started arriving. Emails flooded her inbox. Messages from people she had never met, telling her what her music meant to them. A stroke survivor in Ohio who had started playing piano again after watching the film. A veteran with a hand injury who had given up on guitar until he heard Maya's story. A grandmother in Japan who translated the documentary for her grandchildren because she wanted them to understand that giving up was never the only option. Maya read every single message. Some of them made her cry. Some of them made her laugh. All of them made her realize that she had been wrong about something important. For 12 years, she had believed that her story ended the night of the accident. She had believed that the real Maya, the pianist Maya, the Maya her mother had believed in, had died on that dark road, along with her mother. Everything since then had just been going through the motions, surviving instead of living, existing instead of being. But now she understood that stories don't end the way we expect them to. They change. They transform. They become something we never imagined when we were living through the hardest chapters. She signed with the record label, not to become famous, not to prove anything to anyone, but because she had something to offer that she hadn't known she possessed. She recorded an album of original compositions, all written for pianists with physical limitations. Music that embraced imperfection instead of hiding from it. Music that made space for the broken notes and the stumbling fingers and the hands that didn't work the way they used to. She called the album Eleanor's Garden. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't top any charts, but it found its way to the people who needed it most. Physical therapists started using it in their clinics. Music teachers shared it with students who were ready to give up. Support groups for people with disabilities played it during their meetings. Slowly, quietly, the music spread to places Maya had never imagined it could reach. A year after the documentary premiered, Maya gave her first live performance since the accident. It was a small concert at a community center. Nothing fancy, just a piano and 50 folding chairs filled with people who had followed her journey. Mr. Barton sat in the front row, wearing his good suit, his eyes shining with pride. Maya sat down at the piano and looked out at the audience. She saw stroke survivors and accident victims. She saw elderly musicians and young students. She saw people who had been told their playing days were over, and people who had never believed they could play at all. She placed her hands on the keys. Her left hand trembled slightly, the way it always did. The nerve damage was permanent. It would never get better than this. But that was okay. She started to play, and the music filled the room, imperfect and beautiful and true. Her left hand stumbled in the third measure. It always did, but she kept going, letting the mistakes become part of the melody, letting her limitations tell their own story. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then, applause, loud and long, from people who understood exactly what it had cost her to be sitting there. After the concert, Maya drove to the cemetery where her mother was buried. She had brought a portable keyboard, the kind that ran on batteries. She set it up on the grass beside the headstone and played Eleanor's Garden one more time, just for her mother. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and pink and gold. Somewhere nearby, a bird was singing. Maya's left hand faltered on the final passage. It always did. But she finished the piece anyway, letting the last note fade into the evening air. She thought about her mother. She thought about Eleanor. She thought about Mr. Barton and Diane, and all the strangers who had sent her letters and messages from around the world. She thought about the 19-year-old girl who had woken up in a hospital bed and believed her life was over. That girl had been wrong. Her life wasn't over. It was just beginning. A different chapter. A chapter she never could have written by herself. A chapter that started with a simple knock on her door and a grieving neighbor asking for one small favor. Sometimes the biggest stories start with the smallest requests. Sometimes the music we're meant to make isn't the music we planned. Sometimes the broken notes are the ones that matter most. Maya packed up her keyboard and walked back to her car. Tomorrow she would return to her apartment, sit down at her mother's old piano, and write something new. Another piece of music for people who had been told they couldn't play anymore. Her left hand would stumble. It always would. But the music would keep coming anyway. And that, she had learned, was more than enough.